He collapsed alone in the bathroom, bleeding, feverish, just because he was too proud to call a doctor. Hey there, I'm glad you're here, because this story might just save a life. It's not fiction, it's real, and it all started with what looked like a harmless little bump that nearly killed him. But behind this medical emergency lies something much deeper. A broken healthcare system, a man haunted by grief, and a decision that came seconds away from being too late. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you may see your own health, or someone else's, in a whole new light. Have you ever ignored a symptom out of fear, pride, or uncertainty? Tell us in the comments, we read every one. Your experience might help someone who's afraid to speak up. And if you're into stories that educate, move, and maybe even heal, hit subscribe. We've got more powerful, true stories just like this coming your way. The siren wailed like a desperate cry, slicing through the silence of the Montana night. Red lights strobed across the narrow 2-lane road that led out of the sleepy town of Bridgewater. Inside the ambulance, Walter Green lay strapped to the gurney, his breath shallow, shirt damp with sweat. The interior lights flickered across his weathered face, lined with 63 winters and far more losses than he cared to count. The paramedic next to him, a young man with sharp eyes and calm hands, checked his vitals again, then spoke into the radio. Male, 63. Severe localized infection, febrile, BP dropping, abscess on the inner left thigh, visible swelling, signs of systemic spread, ETA 10 minutes. Walter barely heard him. The pain was stealing everything. His focus, his strength, his pride. A fire was raging beneath his skin, and it pulsed in time with the frantic beating of his heart. The pressure in his leg felt like something trying to break free. His fingers clenched the side rail, knuckles white. Jesus, it's just a damn lump, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone. Just a stupid little bump. The paramedic looked at him. Try to stay calm, Mr. Green. We're almost there. But Walter wasn't listening anymore. His eyes fluttered shut, and in that moment, his mind drifted backwards through time, cutting across 6 quiet weeks like a knife through old wallpaper. Back to when it began, back before the fever, before the ambulance, before the sirens, just a little lump behind the ear, that's all it was. He remembered standing in his bathroom, bare-chested, leaning toward the mirror under the pale yellow light. It had been early September, the kind of cool that hadn't yet turned bitter. He'd just come back from his morning walk along the lake trail, the air crisp with pine and the scent of wet earth. He'd been drying off his face when he noticed it, a small, firm bump just below his right earlobe, painless, no bigger than a grape. He poked at it once, frowned, then shrugged. Probably just a clogged pore, he'd muttered, tossing the towel aside. Ain't nothin'. That had been his mistake, and it wasn't the first. In the cramped, bouncing belly of the ambulance, Walter's breathing grew shallower. A bead of sweat rolled from his temple to his ear, catching in the folds of skin. He felt cold, then hot, then cold again. Marie's voice echoed in his memory, gentle but firm, as it had been earlier that morning. Walter, you can't just sit there and pretend this is nothing. Look at you. You're burning up. That leg is redder than a fire engine. He had grumbled, tried to wave her off. I'll be fine. I've been through worse. She had folded her arms, the way only nurses and stubborn women could. You can't tough guy your way out of sepsis. Sepsis, that word, he hadn't wanted to believe it. But now, every throb in his thigh was a drumbeat warning that she might have been right. He opened his eyes again and caught the paramedic glancing at the monitor. Still with us, Mr. Green? Walter managed a nod. Don't suppose you've got a cheaper way to get me to the hospital? The paramedic chuckled softly, more out of sympathy than amusement. Afraid not, Walter groaned. Figures. Then under his breath, damn healthcare system, cost more to get fixed than to stay broken. He stared up at the fluorescent panel above him. The ceiling was smooth and white, humming softly. It reminded him of the hospital room where his wife had died 7 years ago. That same quiet hum, that same fluorescent glow. She'd had a lump too, a silent one. Her doctor had brushed it off as likely nothing. It wasn't. Her funeral had been on a Tuesday. He hadn't cried until Friday. Now here he was, older, more alone, but just as stubborn. He had ignored this too, just like he had ignored the dull ache in his back last winter, just like the tightness in his chest a few springs ago. He had always believed that pain was just a visitor. It came, it passed. You didn't make a fuss. You endured. But this one wasn't passing. It was digging in. Outside the window, the hospital rose into view, a small brick building at the edge of town, with a faded emergency sign flickering like a dying lighthouse. The ambulance turned sharply and backed into the bay. Doors swung open, cold night air rushed in. The paramedic leaned over him. "Hang tight, we're getting you inside." Walter tried to sit up, failed, and settled for a growl. "If I kick the bucket over this damn thing, I want it written on my stone. Died from a zit." "Let's not go that far yet," the paramedic replied, offering a smile. But Walter wasn't smiling. As the stretcher rolled forward, every bump sent a new wave of heat and pain through his body. The fluorescent hallway lights blurred above him, stretching like smears of paint on a wet canvas. And then, the memory came back full force. The mirror, the small bump, the shrug. That was where this story really started. 6 weeks earlier, the town of Bridgewater was bathed in the muted gold of early autumn. Leaves rustled along cracked sidewalks, and a crispness in the air signaled that summer had quietly surrendered. Mornings came with a chill that demanded jackets, and the pine trees that lined the trail by Granger Lake had begun their slow, dignified transformation into shades of amber and rust. Walter Green's world followed a steady rhythm, as precise as the ticking of the wind-up clock on his mantel. At 6:30 every morning, he woke to the chime of that old brass timepiece, brewed a pot of black coffee, and stepped outside for a walk down to the lake trail. He wore the same forest green jacket he'd had for 20 years, patched twice at the elbow. His walking stick wasn't for support, it was for routine, something to keep his hands busy while his mind wandered. At 63, Walter had lived alone for the better part of a decade. His house, a modest single story with peeling white trim, sat on the quiet end of Poplar Street, flanked by a retired librarian to the left and a family of 6 to the right, who never really spoke to him except to wave. It suited him just fine. The inside of his home was like a preserved museum of his life with his late wife, Elaine. Her photos still adorned the walls. Her recipe cards were still tucked inside the yellowed cookbook on the shelf. Her mug, world's okayest baker, sat untouched in the kitchen cabinet. Walter couldn't bring himself to use it. Not yet. Maybe never. His days were slow, solitary, and carefully managed. Grocery trips on Thursdays, laundry on Sundays, the occasional visit to the hardware store when something rusted, cracked, or refused to behave. He read the newspaper front to back, played old jazz records, and sometimes watched the world through the window with the patience of a man waiting for something he couldn't name. One afternoon, after his walk, Walter stood at the bathroom mirror drying his face and noticed the small bump behind his right ear. It hadn't been there before. It didn't hurt. Just a firm little knot under the skin. He stared at it, tugged his earlobe slightly, then poked at the bump with a frown. "Huh," he muttered. He leaned in closer, adjusted the light, and examined it again. No redness, no tenderness, just there. He rubbed it, winced slightly, not from pain, but from annoyance. "Probably just a clogged follicle," he said out loud, as if that made it less real. He didn't think about it again for days, and even when he did, it wasn't with any urgency. Things appeared and disappeared on aging bodies like random stains on old wallpaper. What mattered was whether it stopped you from living. This hadn't. A few days later, Marie stopped by. Marie Colburn lived 2 houses down. She was 55, a former nurse who had retired early after 2 decades of hospital work in Billings. Marie had a warm face and a direct way of speaking that made people listen. Her short-cropped silver hair framed eyes that had seen a lot, but judged very little. She had taken a quiet liking to Walter over the years, checking in now and then without ever making him feel fussed over. Sometimes she brought leftover stew or fresh bread, other times just small talk. This particular afternoon, she showed up with banana muffins wrapped in a red cloth. "You didn't answer your phone," she said, pushing the screen door open. "I didn't hear it," Walter replied, which was technically true. He kept the ringer off most days. Marie set the muffins on the kitchen table. "You okay? You look a little pale." Walter waved a hand. "Just tired, didn't sleep well." Marie eyed him. "You're sweating, Walt, and you're wearing flannel in 70 degrees. He shifted uncomfortably. "It's nothing." "Uh-huh." She stepped closer. "Let me see your neck." "What for?" "Just let me." Reluctantly, Walter turned. Marie gently pressed her fingers behind his ear and felt the bump, her eyebrows knit together. "How long has this been here?" "A week or 2. Maybe more." She looked at him. "You need to get that checked. It's just a lump, probably fatty tissue." Marie didn't flinch. "Or a cyst, or something worse." I've seen too many people ignore something small until it turns big. I don't need a lecture, Marie. You need a doctor. Walter stepped away and grabbed a muffin. I'll think about it. Marie didn't press further, but the silence that followed was heavy with concern. She left not long after, telling him to call if it changed. He said he would. He didn't. Days turned into a week, then another. The bump didn't go away, and just as Marie had feared, a new one appeared, this time on his upper left thigh. Unlike the one behind his ear, this one ached. At first it felt like a pulled muscle, then a dull throb, then a sharp, burning pulse whenever he walked. But Walter, being Walter, said nothing. He adjusted his gait, took an extra ibuprofen, convinced himself it was a strain. His pride was a fortress built on a foundation of grit and avoidance. When the pain got worse, he made an appointment with Dr. M.C. Carthy, not because he wanted to, but because he ran out of excuses. Bridgewater Community Clinic was a squat brick building with buzzing fluorescent lights and a front desk staffed by teenagers who called everyone sweetie. The magazines in the waiting room were outdated. The fish tank was always a little too green. Dr. Sarah M.C. Carthy had been his primary care physician for 3 years. She was in her 40s, competent and gently persistent. Walter respected her because she didn't treat him like a child. She asked questions, listened, and never sugarcoated things. He hated that she made him feel seen. She examined both bumps carefully, gloved hands pressing and probing with clinical precision. She asked when they had started, if he had fevers, night sweats, weight loss. He lied about the last one. She didn't push. This one behind your ear is most likely an epidermoid cyst, she explained, removing her gloves. They're benign in most cases, but the one on your leg, she paused. That's likely an abscess. It's infected, probably bacterial. We'll need to drain it if it worsens. Walter crossed his arms. Isn't there something I can take? Antibiotics? I can prescribe them, but they may not be enough. If it grows or the pain increases, you need to come back. Don't wait. He grunted. She handed him a printout with aftercare instructions. I'll see you in a week, Mr. Green. Sure, he said, stuffing the paper into his coat pocket like it was junk mail. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves chased each other along the sidewalk. Walter walked slower than usual, the ache in his leg now undeniable. He told himself he'd give it a few more days. Maybe it would go away. Maybe everything would go away if he just waited long enough. By the end of the 3rd week, Walter could no longer ignore the heat simmering beneath his skin. It started with a vague discomfort, a deep aching throb in his thigh that worsened at night. Then came the stiffness. Each step became a negotiation. He told himself it was a pulled muscle, maybe sciatica, and doubled his ibuprofen dose. But by Friday, the pain had sharp edges. The skin around the lump had turned angry red, and the swelling had doubled in size. It felt hot to the touch. His jeans pressed against it uncomfortably, but he didn't change into looser pants. That would be admitting something was wrong. That night, he sat in his recliner, the TV volume turned low, barely watching a rerun of Jeopardy. As his leg pulsed in time with his heartbeat, he was sweating, even though the thermostat read 68. He dabbed his forehead with a dish towel and reached for a glass of water. He missed the glass. His hand trembled. The towel slipped to the floor. Something was wrong. Still, he didn't call anyone, not even Marie. Saturday morning came with gray skies and wind that rattled the gutters. Walter tried to stand, but the moment his weight shifted onto his left leg, a jolt of pain nearly dropped him back into the chair. He bit down hard, gripping the armrest, heart hammering. He shuffled to the bathroom, leaned heavily against the sink, and looked at himself in the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, his hairline damp with sweat. There was a tremor in his jaw he didn't recognize. Behind his right ear, the original lump still lingered, unchanged, quiet. But the one in his leg, it had taken on a life of its own. He pressed a hand against it and hissed through his teeth. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. Walter? Marie's voice echoed down the hallway. You in here? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Marie's footsteps quickened. She found him half leaning over the sink, lips pale, breathing shallow. Jesus, Walt. She rushed forward and steadied him. You're burning up. I'm fine, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. You're not fine. You're sweating through your flannel. Probably a little flu. Marie shook her head. I'm not playing this game with you. Sit down before you fall. She guided him back to the recliner, grabbed a thermometer from his kitchen drawer, she had given it to him months ago just in case, and checked his temperature. 101.8, she said. And your leg looks like it's about to explode. He grunted. I was gonna call the clinic on Monday. You won't make it to Monday. Marie didn't wait for permission. She called the clinic and insisted on speaking directly to Dr. M.C. Carthy. By noon, she had Walter in the passenger seat of her pickup truck, wrapped in his coat, the pain making every bump in the road feel like a stab. Inside the clinic, Dr. M.C. Carthy moved quickly. She didn't waste time with small talk. The abscess was now the size of a lemon, with clear signs of cellulitis spreading along the thigh. She examined him in silence, eyes focused, movements efficient. I told you to come back if it worsened, she said finally, peeling off her gloves. Walter avoided her eyes. Didn't want to make a fuss. You have a fever, inflammation spreading beyond the original site, and signs of systemic infection, she said, her voice calm but firm. This isn't something you wait out, Mr. Green. This is serious. He looked at Marie, then back at the floor. So now what? We'll need to drain the abscess today, M.C. Carthy said. It's not optional anymore. I'll use local anesthetic and make a small incision to relieve the pressure and remove the pus. If we wait, it could spread to your bloodstream. Sepsis? He asked quietly. Yes. Walter sat back, closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. After a pause, he said, I don't know if my insurance covers this. M.C. Carthy's face softened. We'll do the procedure here in the clinic. It's less expensive than a hospital visit, and we'll help you with the paperwork. Less expensive still isn't free. I understand. He glanced toward the door. Last time I was at a hospital, they said I had acid reflux. Turned out I had a bleeding ulcer. Spent 3 days in ICU because of the delay. I'm sorry that happened, M.C. Carthy said, but I promise you, we're not going to guess today. He looked at her, for the first time, eyes cloudy but searching. I don't trust this system. I'm tired of being a number. I don't blame you, she said, but you're not a number to me. You're a person with a dangerous infection, and we can stop it, right now, if you let us. Walter didn't speak for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Fine, let's get it over with. Marie placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Good choice. M.C. Carthy prepped the procedure room. Walter lay back on the table, legs stiff with tension. The light overhead buzzed softly. The cold antiseptic made him flinch. You'll feel pressure, M.C. Carthy warned as she injected the anesthetic. He nodded. Minutes later, she made a small incision. The skin parted, and a thick, yellowish stream of pus emerged. Walter couldn't see it, but he felt the release, like a balloon deflating, like pressure finally letting go. He exhaled sharply. God Almighty, you did well, M.C. Carthy said, working quickly. We'll pack the wound with sterile gauze. You'll need to keep it clean, change dressings daily. Antibiotics will help, but this is the beginning, not the end, of treatment. As she finished, she looked at him seriously. And we need to talk about the cyst behind your ear. Walter blinked. It's not infected, not yet. But it's growing, and given your history, we need to remove it before it causes trouble. Walter sighed, already exhausted. One thing at a time, Doc. I agree, she said gently. But let's not wait for the next fire to start before we reach for water. She handed him aftercare instructions, a prescription, and a follow-up appointment card. As he stood, slowly, with Marie's help, he paused in the doorway. You really think if we hadn't done this today? I think it would have ended in the ER, M.C. Carthy said, or worse. Walter looked at her, then nodded once. Thanks. Don't thank me yet, she replied. You've still got healing to do. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Marie opened the truck door, and Walter slid in slowly, favoring his right side. As they drove back through town, past the hardware store, the gas station, the diner he hadn't visited in months, Walter stared out the window, quiet. Finally, he said, How much do you think that little cut's gonna cost me? Marie chuckled. Hopefully less than your life was worth. He smirked. Can't argue with that math. And then, for the first time in weeks, he leaned back in his seat and let the road carry him home. Walter sat in the passenger seat, eyes closed, chin resting on his chest as Marie's pickup rumbled down Poplar Street. The low hum of the engine, the wind pressing softly against the windows, the distant bark of a dog, it all blurred together in his mind. The pain had dulled, replaced by a deep fatigue that settled into his bones like winter frost. Marie pulled up to his driveway and put the truck in park. Want me to help you inside? He opened one eye, shook his head slowly. I've got it. She didn't argue, just watched as he eased himself out of the truck, careful not to put too much weight on his left leg. The bandage under his pants was warm, damp, and uncomfortable. He felt like someone had cut out part of him and left the hole to remind him. At the door, he fumbled with his keys. Marie didn't leave. "I'll check on you later," she said. Walter nodded without turning around. "I'll probably be asleep. That's fine." He stepped inside and closed the door with a quiet thud. The house felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just him. He left the lights off and walked straight to the kitchen, reached into the cupboard, took down the bottle of aspirin, swallowed 2 dry. The note from Dr. M.C. Carthy was still in his coat pocket. A printed summary of the procedure, aftercare steps, and a reminder: "We recommend removal of the cyst within the next 2 weeks. Please schedule at your earliest convenience." He unfolded it, stared at the words like they were written in a language he didn't understand, then folded it again and shoved it in a drawer with unpaid bills, expired coupons, and a heating repair estimate he never followed up on. The house creaked as he moved. It always did that. Spoke back to him when he tried too hard to be silent. Upstairs, the bedroom door groaned as he opened it. He sank onto the edge of the bed, toes barely touching the floor. Across from him, Elaine's side of the room remained untouched. Her hairbrush still rested on the dresser. A cardigan still hung over the chair by the window. 7 years and he still hadn't moved it. He reached under the bed and pulled out a worn shoebox. Inside were hospital bills. Not hers. His. 3 years ago, he'd been admitted for abdominal pain. They said it was nothing serious. Gave him antacids and told him to rest. 48 hours later, he collapsed on his kitchen floor and was rushed back. Ulcer perforation, emergency surgery. 3 days in ICU. The bill, $18,673.76. He had Medicare, sure, but the not-covered column might as well have been a mortgage payment. He hadn't even opened the most recent envelopes, just kept adding them to the pile. Walter closed the box and pushed it away. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The cyst behind his ear didn't hurt. Not yet, and if he ignored it long enough, maybe it would just stay that way, quiet, harmless, like a memory you try not to stir. He thought of Elaine again, how she had ignored her fatigue, the persistent bruises, the shortness of breath. "I'm just tired," she used to say. "I'm just getting older." They didn't catch the leukemia until it was too late. The last time he saw her alive, she had smiled at him and whispered, "Don't wait too long, Walt. When something feels wrong, say something." He hadn't listened then either. And now, here he was, alone in a dark house with a second chance staring him in the face. But the weight of debt, of uncertainty, of mistrust in a system that had failed him more than once, it was heavier than the pain in his leg. He rolled onto his side, curled up slowly, and closed his eyes. Marie knocked once before letting herself in. She carried a small paper bag from the pharmacy and a casserole dish covered in foil. It was nearly dark outside, and the house had the thick stillness of a place that hadn't seen company all day. Walter was in his recliner, half lit by the warm orange glow of the floor lamp beside him. He looked older somehow, smaller, like the light had pulled something out of him. "Hey," she said gently. Walter didn't look up. "You bring food or more advice?" Marie set the casserole on the counter and held up the bag. "Both." She pulled out a fresh gauze roll, antibiotic cream, and a small packet of medical gloves. "Figured you could use these. Dressing needs to be changed tonight." He gave a tired nod. "Appreciate it." She walked over, sat in the chair across from him, and waited a beat before speaking again. "You didn't schedule the cyst removal," Walter scoffed. "You work for the clinic now? I care about you, that's worse." He didn't answer. The clock ticked between them, filling the room with a gentle rhythm. Marie leaned forward. "You're scared." "Damn right I'm scared," he said quietly. "I'm scared of the bills. I'm scared of another surgery. I'm scared of waking up with a tube down my throat and finding out they took half my skull or something. Walter, I'm tired, Marie. Tired of always waiting for the next bad thing. Tired of fighting off things I can't afford to fix." She let the silence sit before answering. "I know. No, you don't. You had insurance through the hospital. You had retirement. You had stability. Me? I've got this house and a Medicare plan that covers half the story. I open my mailbox, and it's like playing Russian roulette with envelopes." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You know I'm still paying off the ambulance ride from 3 years ago? $1,800 to take me 8 miles to the ER where they misdiagnosed me." Marie's throat tightened. She didn't try to defend the system. She'd seen too much of it herself. I've watched people cry at the front desk, she said. Watched grown men beg to be seen without insurance. Watched mothers tell their kids not to cry because they couldn't afford an X-ray. Walter looked up at her, eyes glassy. Then why do you want me to go back into it? Why do you keep pushing? Because you're still here, she said softly. And as long as you are, you get to choose. Either let it win or live your life in spite of it. He chuckled bitterly. That sounds like something they print on hospital pamphlets. No, it's something I learned from my sister. He turned his head. Marie clasped her hands. You remember I told you about her? She died a few years back. Cancer, wasn't it? Marie nodded, lump in her shoulder. She ignored it, scared of the cost, scared of the process. By the time she got seen, it had metastasized. She paused, blinking quickly. She left behind 2 boys. They were 7 and 9. Walter exhaled slowly. I'm not saying you owe it to anyone to stay alive, Marie said. But maybe, just maybe, you owe it to yourself not to go out with your fists in your pockets. He looked away. I watched Elaine fade too, Marie added. She didn't want to go, Walter. She just didn't know how to fight the silence anymore. The room darkened as the last of the sun slipped behind the trees. Walter stood slowly and walked to the kitchen. He opened a cupboard, took down 2 mugs, and started boiling water. Marie watched him, silent. When he returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea, he handed her one and sat back down. You ever wonder, he said, how much of all this, the insurance, the hospitals, the appointments, it's just a machine chewing us up slowly. Marie sipped her tea, all the time. He stared into his mug. Elaine used to say, there's a difference between living long and living well. She was right. And maybe this is long enough. Marie leaned forward again, this time softer. Then end it on your own terms, she said. Don't let fear write the last page. Walter didn't reply. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the mug to his lips. He took a sip, swallowed hard. Marie stood and walked to the door. Before she left, she looked back at him. Call Dr. M.C. Carthy tomorrow. Schedule it. Or don't. That's your right. But know this, if something changes, if it gets worse, I'm not letting you die in this house alone. He didn't answer. Just looked at her, eyes heavy with a dozen thoughts he couldn't yet say out loud. She left the door unlocked on her way out. That night, Walter sat in silence for a long time. The mug grew cold in his hands. And somewhere, deep in his chest, behind all the stubbornness and fear and scars left by a system that failed him, something small began to shift. The phone sat untouched on the kitchen counter for 2 full days. Walter had looked at it a dozen times, thumb hovering over the call button to Dr. M.C. Carthy's office. He'd even typed the number in once. But each time, something stopped him, something that lived in the space between pride and fear. In the end, the phone remained silent. The abscess had begun to swell again. At first, it was subtle, a faint tightness beneath the gauze. Then came the heat, an almost unbearable warmth radiating from deep within the tissue. By Sunday night, the pain was back to full force, sharper, deeper, hungrier. Walter didn't sleep much. He lay on his side, curled like a comma, a towel wedged between his leg and mattress to soak up the growing moisture from the wound. He hadn't changed the dressing in almost 2 days. He told himself it was fine. He'd do it tomorrow. He just needed rest. His dreams, when they came, were strange and fragmented. Elaine's voice calling from another room. The sound of a distant knock that wouldn't stop. The ticking of the old mantel clock, growing louder until it was unbearable. Then silence. By Monday morning, he could barely stand. He shuffled to the bathroom, gripping the walls, leaving fingerprints in the dust. In the mirror, he saw a man he barely recognized. His skin had taken on a sickly sheen. His lips were pale. His eyes, the stubborn, clear eyes he always relied on, looked distant, disconnected. He sat on the closed toilet seat, panting, and peeled back the gauze. What he saw turned his stomach. The area around the incision had turned a dark, angry purple. The edges of the wound were puffy and wet, leaking a foul-smelling fluid. Veins, tiny and red, spiderwebbed out from the center, stretching farther than they had before. His fingers trembled as he tried to apply new ointment. The tube slipped from his hand and clattered to the tile. He leaned forward to retrieve it, but dizziness swept over him like a crashing wave. His vision narrowed. He gasped, and then darkness. He crumpled sideways, landing hard against the linoleum. His head struck the cabinet. The sound echoed in the empty house like a door slamming shut. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning. The sun had shifted across the window, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Dry leaves scraped against the porch like whispers. The house was still. At 4:10 p.m., Marie knocked on the door. She had stopped by with fresh bandages and some homemade soup, assuming Walter would grumble, thank her, and pretend he was fine. When he didn't answer, she knocked again, waited, then again, harder this time. Still nothing. She circled to the side window and peered in, saw the living room light still on, the tea mug still on the table. Something was wrong. She called his name, then banged on the glass. Still no movement. Her chest tightened. She tried the front door, unlocked. She stepped inside, heart racing. The house was quiet, too quiet. She moved through the rooms, calling softly, then louder. Then she heard it, a faint groan. She followed the sound to the bathroom, and found him. Walter lay curled on the floor, half conscious, skin damp, lips parted. His leg, now bare, was inflamed and discolored. The towel beneath him was soaked through. His breathing was shallow and uneven. "Oh my God," Marie whispered, rushing to his side. She knelt, checking his pulse, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Walter, stay with me, please." His eyes fluttered open just for a second. "Didn't want to bother you," he mumbled. Marie swallowed hard. "Well, you failed." She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 911 with shaking hands. "This is an emergency." The paramedics arrived in less than 7 minutes, though to Marie it felt like an hour. Red lights washed across the living room walls as 2 uniformed EMTs burst through the doorway carrying gear. One knelt beside Walter, quickly checking his vitals, while the other unpacked an IV kit. "Male, mid-60s, febrile, suspected septic infection," the first said into his radio. "Blood pressure low, heart rate elevated." Walter stirred weakly, his eyes half open. The world came to him in fragments, the flashing lights, Marie's worried face, the cold sting of an alcohol swab on his arm. He heard words like infection, abscess, urgent, but they slid past him like water. He tried to speak but coughed instead. "Mr. Green, we're going to take you to Bridgewater Medical," one of the EMTs said. "Hang in there." He wanted to argue. He wanted to say no, to tell them he didn't want another ride he couldn't afford, but the strength wasn't there. All he could manage was a faint, bitter laugh that turned into a groan. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, Marie caught his hand. "I'm right behind you," she said firmly. His lips moved. "You didn't have to. I did." They wheeled him out through the front door, the late afternoon air crisp and sharp against his clammy skin. For a moment, lying there under the sky, he thought of the lake trail, the pine trees swaying, the crunch of gravel under his boots. He wondered if he'd see it again. Inside the ambulance, everything was white and bright. The siren wailed, red lights flickering against the cabinets. An oxygen mask slipped over his face, cold IV fluid snaked into his vein. He closed his eyes. This was where it had begun, the scene from weeks ago now circling back on itself. The siren, the gurney, the pulse of pain in his leg. Only this time, he was awake enough to feel the full weight of it. It was just a lump, he thought, just a stupid little lump. But the truth hit him like a punch. It had never been just a lump. It had been a warning, his body whispering, then shouting, then screaming for help. And he had ignored it until it roared. A memory surfaced, Elaine in her hospital bed, reaching for his hand. "Don't wait too long, Walt," she had said. "When something feels wrong, say something." He blinked against the sting in his eyes. The mask fogged with each breath. Marie's voice came faintly from the front of the ambulance as she spoke to the driver. He couldn't catch the words, only the tone, steady, urgent, refusing to give up. For the first time in years, Walter felt something shift inside him, a small crack in the wall he had built between himself and the world. He wasn't ready to die on a bathroom floor. He wasn't ready to let fear of debt, pride, or mistrust write the last line of his story. When the ambulance doors swung open at the hospital bay, the same brick building rose before him. Only this time, he didn't feel like a victim being dragged inside. He felt like a man about to choose. "Doctor?" MC Carthy met them at the entrance, her hair pulled back, expression focused but kind. "Let's get him to exam 2, she instructed. As they rolled him in, she walked alongside, eyes scanning his chart. "You're stubborn, Mr. Green," she said quietly. "But you're here. That's what matters. He managed a weak smile beneath the mask. Didn't have much choice. You did, she said. And you made the right one. Inside the exam room, the team worked quickly. Blood cultures, IV antibiotics, new dressings. MC Carthy stood at his side, explaining each step in calm, clear words. We've stabilized your vitals, she said. But we need to address the source before this happens again. That cyst behind your ear, it needs to come out, not later, not someday, now. Walter stared at the ceiling. For a long time he said nothing, then he turned his head slightly toward her. Do it. MC Carthy blinked. Are you sure? I'm tired of waiting, he said, his voice rough but steady. Take it out. Marie, standing in the corner, exhaled slowly. A smile flickered at the edges of her mouth. MC Carthy nodded once. We'll schedule it for tomorrow morning. Walter closed his eyes, letting the sound of their voices wash over him. For the first time in weeks, the pounding in his chest wasn't just fear. It was something else. Relief, maybe. Or resolve. He thought of Elaine again, but this time her face wasn't fading. She was smiling, standing on the lake trail in the early morning light, waving him forward. The oxygen mask hissed softly. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm. Outside the window, dusk settled over the town like a blanket. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Surgery, recovery, maybe another battle. But tonight, lying in the hospital bed with Marie nearby and Dr. MC Carthy's quiet competence anchoring the room, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he might actually make it. The morning of the surgery began quietly. A pale light filtered through the narrow hospital blinds, painting stripes across the foot of Walter's bed. He had been awake since before dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of machines and the occasional squeak of rubber soles in the hallway. His leg throbbed dully where the abscess had been drained, but the fever had broken overnight. The air felt clearer in his lungs. He turned his head to see Marie asleep in the visitor's chair, arms folded, chin tucked into her chest. She had refused to go home. Dr. MC Carthy had let her stay. Walter watched her for a moment, then looked back at the ceiling. He thought of all the mornings he'd spent alone at his kitchen table. The tick of the old brass clock his only company. Now there was someone in the room. Someone who cared enough to sit upright all night in a stiff chair just to make sure he woke up. A nurse entered quietly, checking his fourth "Good morning, Mr. Green," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" He considered the question. Like someone hit pause, he murmured. She smiled. "We'll take you down in about 30 minutes. Dr. MC Carthy will be doing the procedure herself." He nodded, trying to swallow the lump rising in his throat. He'd had surgeries before, but this felt different. Not emergency, not chaos. Chosen. When the orderly came to wheel him to the OR, Marie stirred awake. She reached for his hand, squeezed it. "I'll be right here when you're out," she said. "I know," he replied. The hallway rolled past above him as the gurney moved. A blur of ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights. He could smell antiseptic, faint and sharp. It was the same smell from Elaine's last days, but this time it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a crossroads. Inside the operating room, everything was bright and precise. Stainless steel instruments laid out like silverware at a meticulous dinner. The anesthesiologist introduced himself, adjusted the mask, explained the process. Walter listened, nodding. Dr. MC Carthy appeared at his side, hair tucked under a cap, eyes visible above her mask. "We'll take good care of you," she said. "I'm counting on it," he answered, and meant it. The anesthesiologist told him to count backward from 10. He made it to 7 before the room dissolved into softness. Mun in a dream, he was walking along the lake trail at dawn. The air was crisp, pine-scented, the path lined with frost-tipped grass. Ahead, Elaine waited, wearing the same blue scarf she'd worn the day they'd first walked this trail together. She smiled, and the years fell away from her face. "About time you showed up," she said. "I've been stubborn," he admitted. "You always were." They walked side by side, no pain, no weight. The lake glimmered silver in the morning light. "You're not done yet," she told him gently, "but you can't do it alone." He stopped. "I don't know how to let anyone help me." "You already have," she said, tilting her head toward the hospital behind him. "Marie, Dr. MC Carthy, even the young guy in the ambulance. You let them in." He looked down at his hands, noticing for the first time that they were steady. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know." She reached out and touched his cheek. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about walking anyway. The trail opened ahead, sunlight spilling across it. Elaine smiled again, then began to fade, her outline dissolving into mist. "Live well, Walt," she said. "Not just long." Then she was gone. He woke to soft beeping and the faint scent of antiseptic. His throat felt dry. His head was heavy but clear. He blinked at the ceiling. Different room, dimmer lights. Marie was there, leaning forward in her chair, eyes wide. "You're awake," she said, relief flooding her voice. Walter licked his lips. "How'd it go?" Dr. M.C. Carthy stepped into view, pulling off her gloves. "The cyst is out," she said. "Clean margins, no signs of malignancy. We'll confirm with pathology, but I'm optimistic." He exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. "We also cleaned the abscess area again," she continued. "With proper wound care and antibiotics, you should heal fine." Walter closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Thank you," he said. "You did the hard part," M.C. Carthy replied. "You showed up." Marie smiled faintly. "Told you you're too stubborn to go out like that." He tried to chuckle, but it came out a rasp. "Maybe I'm learning." Over the next 2 days, recovery settled into a rhythm. Nurses changed his dressings. M.C. Carthy stopped by twice a day to check on him. Marie brought crossword puzzles and coffee she smuggled from the cafeteria. Walter began to sit up longer, eat small meals, and even shuffle a few steps down the hallway with a walker. But something deeper had shifted. The first morning he managed to stand at the window, looking out at the hospital parking lot. He felt a strange swell of gratitude, not for the illness, but for the crack it had opened in his life. Through that crack, people had stepped in, and through that crack, a bit of light. He thought about his son Daniel, living 3 states away. They hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years, not since a bitter argument over the estate after Elaine's passing. Walter had clung to his pride the way he'd clung to his pain. Now both seemed smaller. He asked Marie for his phone. "Gonna call the clinic?" she teased. "No," he said. "Someone else." When Daniel answered, there was a pause. "Dad?" "It's me," Walter said. His voice cracked. "I'm in the hospital. Had a bit of a scare. But I'm okay now." Another pause. Then Daniel's voice, softer. "Do you want me to come?" Walter swallowed hard. "I'd like that." Marie pretended not to listen, but her smile widened. Later that afternoon, Dr. M.C. Carthy came in with the final pathology report. "All clear," she said. "No cancer. Just a stubborn cyst. You'll need to keep up with follow-ups, but you're going to be fine." Walter nodded, feeling something like a weight lifting from his chest. "Guess I'm not done yet." "No," M.C. Carthy said. "You're not." That night, as he lay in the hospital bed, he thought again of Elaine's words, "Live well, not just long." He thought of Marie asleep in the chair, of Daniel booking a flight, of Dr. M.C. Carthy's steady hands. He thought of the lake trail waiting under the morning sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the story wasn't ending, it was beginning again. Walter stepped through the front door slowly, leaning on a new wooden cane Marie had bought him from the pharmacy gift shop. The late autumn light spilled through the windows, casting soft golden hues across the hardwood floor. Dust danced in the still air. The house smelled faintly of old books and tea. It was the same house he had left a week ago, but he was not the same man returning. Marie followed behind him with a small overnight bag. She looked around, checking that everything was in place, like she always did. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" Walter shook his head. "I need to be alone for a bit, just to let it settle." She nodded, understanding. "I'm 5 minutes away. Call if anything changes." He smiled gently. "I'll call, I promise." When the door closed behind her, the silence crept in again. But it no longer felt threatening. It felt reflective, like the pause at the end of a long sentence. He moved slowly through the house, reacquainting himself with the space. His arm grazed the bookshelf. His fingers brushed over Elaine's photo, still framed on the mantel. He whispered, "I'm home," and stood there for a moment longer, listening. That evening he brewed tea and sat by the window with a wool blanket across his lap. His body still ached in places, but the pain no longer defined his day. It had been replaced by a deeper awareness, of breath, of time, of chances not yet wasted. The next morning, just after sunrise, a knock came at the door. Walter opened it to find Daniel, his son, now 36, carrying a small duffel bag and a worried smile. His hair had grayed early, like Walter's had. His eyes were cautious but soft. They stared at each other for a moment. "You look older," Daniel said. Walter chuckled. So do you. They stood there another beat, and then Walter stepped aside. Come in. Daniel entered, taking in the familiar walls. Same carpet. Some things don't change easy. They sat at the kitchen table, a space that had once held Sunday pancakes, math homework, silent breakfasts after arguments. Walter poured them both coffee. The silence that followed wasn't hostile, it was tired, unsure. Finally, Walter said, I'm glad you came. Daniel nodded. I didn't want to hear it secondhand if things went south. They didn't, Walter said. Not this time. Another pause. I'm sorry, Dad, Daniel said quietly, for how I left, for what I said. Walter looked down at his hands. You weren't wrong. I was angry. I handled it badly. Daniel reached across the table, tentative. I just didn't know how to help you back then. After Mom, I didn't know how to be helped, Walter admitted. Still don't half the time. Their hands met, briefly, but it was enough. A bridge was starting to rebuild, one conversation at a time. Over the next few days, Walter healed more than just his incision. He and Daniel walked slowly around the neighborhood. They fixed a leaky faucet together, watched an old Western movie they both loved as kids. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. But the weight that had settled between them for years was finally lifting. Marie stopped by with groceries and sharp commentary on the weather. She made Daniel laugh, which Walter secretly loved. At one point, she caught Walter reading his aftercare instructions with a highlighter. Who are you and what have you done with Walter Green? He smirked. Don't get used to it. By the end of the week, Walter had an idea. He called the local community center and asked if they'd be open to hosting a short talk about health awareness for seniors. The coordinator was thrilled on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. Walter stood at the front of a modest room filled with 24 retirees, veterans, and older couples from the area. The walls were lined with faded bulletin boards, and someone had brewed decaf coffee in a large silver urn. Walter wore a clean button-up and a navy sweater. His cane leaned against the podium. He looked out at the faces, some curious, some skeptical, and began. My name's Walter Green, he said. I'm 63 years old, and a few weeks ago, I almost died from something I thought didn't matter. He told them the story, about the lump, the delay, the infection, the pride, the ambulance ride, the cost, the fear. He didn't dramatize it, he just laid it bare. I was afraid of the system, of the bills, of being ignored again, and I was wrong. Not about the system, it's broken in places, but I was wrong to think I had to go through it alone. He paused, looking around. Some of you probably have something you're ignoring, a pain, a bump, a feeling that something isn't right. Don't wait, say something. At the end, a woman in the front row stood and asked, What made you change your mind? Walter smiled. A neighbor who wouldn't take no for an answer, a doctor who looked me in the eye, and a memory of someone I loved who never got the chance. After the talk, people came up to shake his hand. One man told him his story about prostate cancer caught late. Another admitted he hadn't been to a doctor in 10 years. A third thanked him for saying out loud what so many were too ashamed to say, that fear keeps more people sick than illness itself. That night, Walter walked home slowly, the wind tugging at his coat, the clouds parting just enough to reveal a sliver of moonlight. He felt tired, but it was the kind of tired that followed a day well lived. In the days that followed, he and Marie started a weekly walking group for seniors. Daniel extended his visit by another week. Dr. M.C. Carthy invited Walter to speak at a rural healthcare panel. He agreed. One morning, as he sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun melt the frost from the grass, he reached for a small notebook and began to write. He wrote about Elaine, about fear, about pride, about that cyst, that abscess, that moment on the bathroom floor when everything almost ended. And then he wrote the words that would close his talk at the healthcare panel the following month. It was just a bump. That's what I told myself. Just a bump. But it wasn't. It was a warning, a teacher, a turning point. That bump didn't almost kill me. It saved my life. Because sometimes the smallest thing forces you to face the biggest truths. And the truth is, we can't do this alone. We were never meant to. He closed the notebook, set it on the table beside him, and watched the steam rise from his cup. The lake trail was waiting. The sun was rising. And Walter Green was still here. Winter came slowly to Bridgewater that year. It didn't rush in with snowstorms or biting winds. Instead, it crept across the town like an old friend slipping in through the back door. Quiet, familiar, inevitable. Walter had taken to walking the lake trail again, albeit slower, wrapped in layers, his cane tapping rhythmically against the gravel. Marie sometimes joined him, sometimes didn't. When she didn't, he still looked toward her porch as he passed, as if her presence lingered there in the morning frost. His house had changed in small ways. A calendar hung on the kitchen wall with penciled-in appointments. The tea shelf had expanded. A new lamp sat beside the recliner. Daniel had insisted on better lighting. Even Walter admitted it helped. He was still recovering, of course. Healing wasn't linear. Some days his leg ached, or he caught himself holding his breath when the mail arrived. But other days, most days now, he breathed fully. He watched the sunrise. He answered his phone. And he showed up. One Tuesday afternoon, Dr. M.C. Carthy called to remind him of his 6-week follow-up. No signs of infection, no abnormalities, she said, flipping through his chart in the clinic room. Blood work looks good. You're in better shape than some of my 50-year-old patients. Walter smirked. Don't let that go to their heads. She laughed. Still stubborn, I see. I prefer selectively cooperative. As they wrapped up, she glanced toward the door. Actually, would you mind waiting a few minutes? I've got someone else here I'd like you to talk to. Walter raised an eyebrow but nodded. Sure. 10 minutes later, a man in his late 50s walked in, shuffling slightly, face pale, eyes wary. Name's Carl, McCarthy said, gently introducing them. He's got a cyst on his back he's been ignoring. Refuses to schedule removal. Carl looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Walter didn't preach. He didn't quote medical advice. He just said, I almost died because I thought I knew better, because I didn't trust the system, because I didn't want to be a burden. But the truth is, waiting cost me more than acting ever could have. Carl looked at him for a long moment. Did it hurt? He asked quietly. Walter smiled. Everything hurts when you wait too long. A week later, Carl scheduled his surgery. Then December brought the first real snowfall. Walter shoveled his porch in the early hours, then made hot cocoa, then sat down to finish a letter. He had started writing again. Nothing fancy, just reflections, small essays. He didn't think anyone would read them, but Marie said it didn't matter. Writing reminds you that your story still matters, she told him. Even if no one reads it, you do. That afternoon, Marie knocked on his door. She looked off. Not panicked, just quiet. Walter let her in. You okay? I had a checkup this morning, she said. Routine. He waited. They found a lump, she continued. Here. She touched her neck, left side, small. Probably nothing, they said. But they want to do an ultrasound. Walter felt a chill not caused by the winter air. He gestured to the table. Sit. They didn't say much for a while. Just sip tea. Finally, he looked at her. Scared? She nodded. So was I. She smiled faintly. I remember. You want me to come with you? She didn't answer right away. Then, yeah, I think I do. The ultrasound appointment was quiet, the room dimly lit, the machine humming softly. Walter sat in the corner, watching as the technician moved the wand over Marie's neck. She wore a brave face, but her fingers gripped the edge of the table. The tech didn't say much, just nodded, clicked, recorded. Later in the waiting room, Marie turned to Walter. I'm not ready for this to be serious, she said. I just got used to hoping again. Walter reached over and took her hand. Whatever it is, we'll face it early. That's the difference. Marie looked at him, eyes wide. You know what's strange? What? I almost didn't go to that appointment. I only went because you've been lecturing half the town. Walter laughed, but there was something tender in it. Then let's just say the system works, at least when we hold each other through it. A week later, the results came back benign. The lump was a swollen lymph node, nothing more. Still, Marie agreed to do follow-ups every 6 months. Now that I've got you breathing down my neck about it, she teased. Winter passed, then spring. Walter's strength returned. Daniel called every Sunday. Marie brought fresh herbs from her garden. The walking group grew from 2 people to 6, then 12. Some came for the exercise, others came for the company. One sunny afternoon, the community center invited Walter back, this time not just to speak but to record a video as part of their new health awareness campaign. He stood in front of the same faded bulletin board, a bit more upright this time. The camera rolled. The light was soft. He took a breath. My name is Walter Green, he began. And this is a story about something small, something easy to ignore. He told the story again. with less fear this time, more clarity. And then, near the end, he paused. We all carry things: pain, pride, fear. Some of it's visible, some of it isn't. But if I've learned anything, it's that no one heals alone. It's not weakness to ask. It's not shameful to need help. Sometimes the smallest thing, a checkup, a phone call, a friend knocking on the door, can change everything. He looked directly at the lens. I thought a bump didn't matter. I thought asking for help meant giving up control. I was wrong on both counts. That bump saved my life, because it forced me to stop pretending I was invincible. And finally, if you're watching this and waiting for a sign to do something about that thing you've been ignoring, this is it. He stepped down from the podium to applause, not thunderous, but real, and enough. On the 1-year anniversary of his hospital visit, Walter walked the lake trail alone, stopping at the bench where he and Elaine used to sit. The trees rustled in the wind. The sky stretched wide above him. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and read it quietly to the trees. We once thought a small lump was just a nuisance, but it became a message we couldn't ignore. In that pain we found people. In those people we found hope. Not because the system is perfect, but because we are stronger, together, flawed, frightened, but willing. He stood there a moment longer, then smiled. Somewhere down the path, Marie waved for him to catch up. He did. Sometimes it's not the big tragedies that change our lives, but the small signs we choose not to ignore. A simple lump, a quiet neighbor who cares, a single decision to ask for help. In the end, Walter didn't just survive a medical emergency. He rediscovered the power of connection, of humility, and of second chances. So the next time your body whispers, or someone you love says, maybe you should get that checked out, listen. Because healing doesn't begin with medicine, it begins with awareness, with courage, and most of all, with not waiting too long. And as Walter walks off into that cold morning light, his cane tapping softly beneath the golden trees, you might ask yourself, what am I ignoring in my own life, physically or emotionally, that deserves attention today? Let us know in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story that could change the way you see the world.